Welcome to an RPG in a Box Basics video tutorial. In this video, we're going to cover the topic of behaviors. I'm going to explain where on the interface you can set up behaviors. We'll talk about how to set them up. We'll talk about where they're used and where they're not used, and how to script them. Okay, so before we get into any of the practical stuff, setting anything up and talking through everything, let me first of all point out in the documentation where you can find the page on behaviors. So if you go to the documentation tab within RPG in a Box, click in the search box, and if you type behavior or behave or whatever, it's the first one. It's listed as NPC behavior, okay? But it's essentially the same thing. If you double click that, it will bring up the behavior page, and this will explain all the things that we're going to go over in this video. So if you want to further read up on the options, if I forget to mention anything, it should be here listed on this page. And we've also got how to script behaviors and some examples of how to do that. So we'll be going over some of this stuff in this video anyway. But I just point it out just so you know it's there, just so if you want to read up on things after the video, that's how you get that information. Okay. So let's go over how behaviors work. First of all, where do you set up behaviors? Well, first of all, what are behaviors? So behaviors are basically the artificial intelligence of your non-player characters. So anyone who's not the player character that you're going to be controlling yourself, what governs whether they move around, it governs whether they can be attacked, it governs whether they're hostile or friendly, it governs whether whether you can talk to them, all those sorts of things. And there's various different options that we can go over, but that's essentially what behaviors are. They are the brain of your NPCs, basically. So where can you set on the interface behaviors? Well, there's two places you set behaviors. One place is when you place a character down on a map. So let's say, for example, we place this purple slime down onto this map. We can then select the slime, the character, whatever. And if we scroll down in their entity properties, there's a section called behavior settings. And it might be set to no behavior, but you can drop it down and select custom. And then this is where you can fill in the behavior settings, and all of these will go over in this video. This is where you fill in the behavior settings, and then this slime will have this behavior when you play the game. So what's important to understand is this will be sort of behaviors that you assign to this NPC as it starts on the map when you first load into it or start the game, okay? However, there are other ways that we can set behaviors. We can actually go into the game configuration panel at the top here, double click this, and there's an actual setting, there's an actual area of the settings specifically for behaviors, okay? And if you don't have any set up, then this will be empty, like mine is at the moment, where we've just got none, okay? And you can click add here to create a new preset. And what you'll do is you'll give it a name, so we could call it something like behavior 1. As soon as you click OK, we get the same options here that you would have had on a selected character. So these options here are also found here. Now, why would you use the behaviors panel here rather than set it on an NPC? Well, this panel is good for creating different behaviors that you want characters to either start with or change to. Okay, so for example, maybe you've got a character that starts standing still and doesn't move anywhere, but then later on in your game you want them to start walking around. So you're going to want to change the behavior. You're going to want to go from one behavior to another. Now, one way of doing that is to create a whole different preset like we're doing here and change these settings and then tell the NPC to switch to this behavior here, the one that we've created. So they'll go from this one to this one, okay? And by giving it a name, like we've done here, behavior 1, that's how you can refer to it in a script. You can say switch to behavior 1, and then it will switch to all of these settings, okay? So Another reason why you might set up behaviors is that when you're in the voxel editor, so let's just go back to, first of all, to the model maker. If we have a character open, like for example, Sarah, you'll notice if we scroll down to her default behavior setting, by default, unless you don't have a behavior, let's just for a minute go back to game configuration and delete that. Just imagine that's empty again. By default, and we'll just reopen Sarah just to refresh. By default, in the default behavior option, you'll only have two choices: standard and no behavior. Okay. Now, no behavior basically means they're dumb. They've got zero AR. They're not just not going to stand still. They're going to do nothing. You're not going to be able to make them do anything. Okay. What is standard? Standard is basically the default behavior. So in other words, if we place Sarah down on the map, we can see what that looks like. So if we go to the map editor and we place a copy of Sarah down and we select Sarah, this is the standard settings. So do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, off, all, random range 2 to 3, random none. All of these settings here, this is your standard. Okay. So if you're happy with that, then you don't need to do anything. But let's say we wanted every instance of Sarah that we place down on the map to have an on-def script. So for example, we'll go over all of this stuff in a minute, but I just want to sort of quickly explain the difference between where and how you can apply behaviors. So I need an example to explain why it's useful. So let's say we've got an on-def script. So we say run script. Let's pretend that's our script, right? Now, one way we could do that is to place Sarah and then select Sarah and then go to run and then change her on-def setting to run script test. But if we placed another Sarah down and we wanted the same behavior, we've now got to select this Sarah and do it all over again. We've got to say on-def run script test. So having to set this for every instance of Sarah you place down might not be, if you want every Sarah to have the same on-def script, that's going to be, a lot of tedious work. So what we really want is we want every Sarah we place down to have that behavior. So that's why you go into the game configuration panel as well and use this behaviors interface, because behaviors you create here will appear in the voxel editor as assignable behavior. Okay, notice how we can only have standard and no behavior right now. But if I go into the behaviors panel and I create a new one, let's say called Sarah, and I specifically say run script on def test and save this script to save this behavior. Now in the voxel editor, in the default behavior option, we need to refresh the model. So reopen it again. When we drop this down, now we've got our Sarah behavior, which wasn't there before because we didn't have it. It didn't exist. But now we've created this. If we select that, then we can see the settings, I think, or maybe we can't. No, you can't see them in the voxel editor. But what that basically means now is that every Sarah we place down or spawn in will have this behavior applied to them automatically. So if we go into the map editor again and we place down 5 Sarahs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we select any one of them at random, we should see they're using the preset Sarah, which means they've already got this script assigned. And if you look at this setting, if you look at this area on the screen as I select each Sarah, you can see they're all set to run script test on def. Okay. And that's because we basically created a behavior in the game configuration panel. And then we've told this model, not in the map, but in the model editor, we told the model that every instance of this model should have this behavior assigned. Okay, but that's only useful if you want, that behavior to be applied to every instance of that character. If you want different Sarahs to have different behaviors, then you'll want to sort of do that on the map. So in other words, you'll place a Sarah, set her behavior here to one type of behavior, and then place another Sarah, select her and change the preset maybe to custom or something, or if you've got other presets, then just select those presets. Okay. So those are the two reasons for why you would create behaviors in the game configuration. One reason is for scripting, so you can change someone's behavior really quickly and easily by just referencing a preset name. But the other reason is for assigning behaviors to models so that every instance of that model will inherit that behavior. Okay. So now that we've gone over the difference between the behaviors editor and behaviors on a map placed NPC, let's talk about things to know about behaviors. Okay. First of all, behaviors only work in real-time maps. So, in other words, this is a map which is set to grid movement, but it could be free movement. It doesn't matter. And if we select Justin, for example, and we tell Justin that he can move around, he's unrestricted. He can go wherever he wants. Okay. But if we load into this map in a tactical turn-based battle, so Overworld, for example, if we were to go into a tactical turn-based battle, Justin wouldn't be walking around. Okay, that's because behaviors do not work in menu-based battles, and they don't work in tactical turn-based battles. They are only for maps where you are freely walking around, either in grid or free movement, and then you want NPCs sort of randomly roaming around, or whether it be animals or characters or whatever, just sort of randomly walking around the map. That's where behaviors come in. Okay, the reason why behaviors don't work in tactical turn-based battles is because obviously in turn-based battles where it's governed by a turn-based system, that's what then takes over the AI. It's a completely different mechanic at that point. Okay, behaviors are just for the sort of idly roaming around NPCs. Okay, so another thing that's important to note about behaviors: the player doesn't use a behavior, the player character. So in other words, in the game configuration general, we have a player character assigned as base Justin. So that means when I play the game, I'm playing as this character here. So the player, it should be obvious to say this, but the player does not use behavior because it's an AI only setting. Okay. Now you can actually trick the game with code, with scripting, to actually assign the player a behavior, and then the player character will start roaming around randomly. But be warned doing that because it's a permanent thing. In other words, you can't undo it with scripting. So once you've done that to the player, you are basically locking out the player from being able to interact with the game. They can't regain control of the player character once they've been assigned a behavior. So while you can do it, that doesn't mean you should. Unless, of course, you are happy for, in that moment, the player completely loses interactive control of the game. Why you would do that, I don't know, because you can just use locking the player and then scripting player movement if you want them walking around, because at least in that case, you can then give the player back control afterwards. So never give the player behavior because that just breaks the system. But I mentioned that you can just because you actually can, but doesn't mean you should. Okay, players should not be using behaviors. Okay, it's an AI NPC only feature. Okay, so with those out of the way, now let's go through all the various settings that you have available to you in the behaviors panel and what they mean, what they do. Okay, so let's start by setting that back to do nothing. So let's go through this behavior as we've got it open at the moment, going from top to bottom. So when player interacts, should be pretty self-explanatory. It tells this character how they should react if we as the player click on them or press the interact key, if you're in close proximity. So the options are do nothing, pretty self-explanatory, means that when you interact with this character, it's going to have 0 effect. We've got start dialogue. That creates a second option underneath, which is where you can set what dialogue does it start. So if we select dialogue, for example, that now means if we, the player, interact with this particular character who's got this behavior assigned, it will start a dialogue and it will trigger this particular dialogue file. So if you want to know how to make NPCs talk to you, that's how you do it. You give them a behavior where part of that behavior is when the player interacts, when they click on or press a key when in close proximity to this character, it will trigger a start dialogue request. And then this is where you would point them to the dialogue that you create in the dialogue editor. Okay. Aside from dialogue, we could also say when you interact, they start a battle. And then we can set, it creates an option underneath, which is what battle do you want to load. This list will be empty if you haven't set up a turn-based or menu-based battle in the combat tab. Okay, because I've got it listed down here so I can select it. And again, pretty self-explanatory. If the player clicks on or interacts with this character that has this behavior assigned, it's going to start a turn-based or menu-based battle. Okay. We can also run a script, and then again, it creates an option. What script do you then want to run? And that means that when the player interacts with this character that's got this behavior, it's going to run a script in that moment. So that's when player interacts. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So we'll put that back to do nothing. The next setting we have is when next to player. So that basically means when the player walks onto a tile that is literally right next to this character. It's the same settings. So we can either start a dialogue, start a battle, or run a script. So it's like when player interacts, except the player doesn't actually have to click on them. They just have to walk to a tile right next to this character. And then therefore this character will be next to the player. And then it will trigger that event if they've got a behavior with that event set. Okay. When player collides means that the player bumps into this NPC. There's only two options for this: do nothing or run a script. Okay. And then on death is when this character dies. So it's not when the player dies, it's when this character dies. So if we put this behavior on Sarah, for example, an NPC on our map, or Justin, for example, then when Justin dies, we can have a script be run. Okay. Again, it only takes two settings: either do nothing or run a script. Okay. Next option we have is can trigger scripts. By default, this is off. Now, what this is used for is predominantly tiles, because when you place tiles, you can give tiles scripts. For example, when the player enters a tile, you can have it trigger a script. Or when the player leaves a tile, you can have it trigger a script. Okay. Now, if we select the tile for a moment, let's say this one, and we do, we look at the scripts drop down, we can see the different trigger events. So we've got character enters tile, character stops on tile, character exits tile. We even got character interacts. Okay. Obviously, NPCs don't interact, but they can certainly move around. So because this is generic, it's not player enters tile, it's character enters tile. That suggests that we could also have NPCs trigger a script if they were to walk either on or through this tile. However, that's not going to be the case. That's not going to trigger if they've currently got a behavior where this is off, because this is saying that this NPC cannot trigger scripts. So if they step on a tile which is listening for a character to enter the tile, it's not going to hear this NPC, because this NPC is at this point in time got a behavior where this is switched off. If you turn this on, then when the NPC steps on a tile that's set to character enters tile, it will hear this NPC and therefore it will trigger. Okay. Now, this isn't the only place where this is set. So if you set it here and it's still not working, be mindful that it's also on the tile itself. So in other words, if we say character enters tile locked, we also have to scroll down to this option here where it says triggerable by NPCs. You have to turn that on as well. So the two settings have to be on together in order for scripts, for tile scripts to trigger by an NPC. You don't have to do this if it's just the player that's stepping on a tile, but if you want an NPC to trigger it, then this needs to be on, and also they need to have a behavior at the time where this is also on. Does that make sense? Next, we have attackable in real time. This is basically, is this NPC, can it be attacked? So pretty self-explanatory. So if we say off, then we can't hit it with anything. You know, if you've got a weapon equipped, you can't hit it. If we turn this on, it creates a few options. You'll notice it also disables a couple of options further up. If I turn it off for a moment, we have these player interacts when next to options down here where we could say start dialogue, run script, etc. We went over those a moment ago. But notice when I turn this on, those grey out. That's because you can't have characters that can be interacted with or when standing next to if they're attackable, because this behavior will override this behavior. Okay, so for example, you can't attack a character, or to be more precise, you can't speak to a character that you've set to be attackable, because the idea is you're going to be attacking them. Why would you be speaking to them? So it disables the sort of dialogue part of the behavior. It also disables their ability to trigger a battle, because this is assuming it's a real-time combat. So why would the two settings be on at the same time? If you want to fight them in real time, then you don't want to start a turn-based battle. So that's why it grays out the ability for those to be set at the same time. Okay, so just be mindful that if you make an attackable in real-time NPC, it's going to disable your ability to talk to them and also your ability to trigger with that NPC a turn-based battle. Okay. Now, what are the options that attackable in real time creates underneath it? It creates some new options. We have hostility. These are pretty self-explanatory. Always hostile means that we've now created an enemy. It means when the player steps within close enough proximity for this NPC to attack you, it will. Okay. Hostile, if attacked, means that they're not going to start hostile, but if you hit them, they're now going to start attacking you, and you've basically made an enemy. Okay, they're now going to continue to attack you until their behavior is either changed or you kill them. Okay. Never hostile basically means you've created someone who's just not going to fight back. Okay, you can kill them, but they're not going to fight back. Okay. Next, we've got loot drop. Now, this is going to be blank, like mine is, unless you go into the combat editor and you actually set up loot drop and what's in a loot drop. So now we can select loot here, and that means that if this NPC dies on a real-time map, they'll drop that loot drop. Okay. And then we can set experience points. So maybe we get 70 experience for killing this enemy. Okay. So those are the options that you have available to you if you make this behavior attackable in real time. Okay. We'll put this back and turn this off. Next, we have the movement area. The settings you have are all unrestricted, none immobile, or group. Let's go over them quickly. All basically means they'll basically walk around the whole map. So any tile that's passable within there that they can reach using the green navigation lines that you see on a map, they will walk randomly across that route. Okay, or at least they'll follow the behavior that you set. We haven't set that. We haven't talked about how they move yet. This is just where do they move. So all basically means they can go anywhere. They're unrestricted. Okay. None immobile means they don't go anywhere. So this is useful for people that you just want standing always in a certain spot, whether that be quest givers or NPCs that, you know, for some reason you just want them standing in one place, like they're a sort of statue or something, whatever purpose you want for them to just absolutely stay where you've placed them on the map or stay where they end up. None basically means they completely stop moving around the map in any degree, in any fashion. Okay. And then the final setting for this option is group. And if we select that, it should create another option underneath. And we then type in a group name. So group 1, for example. Now, I don't have a group at the moment, but what you would do is in the map editor, you would load up your map. Wrong map. You would select a group of tiles. So let's say those tiles, add them to a group, give them a name, group 1, whatever. And now in your behavior, that means that they can only walk around these 6 tiles. They can't go outside. They'll only choose to walk around these tiles. They can be told to walk outside, right? If you force them to, but while they've got a behavior assigned and it's just left to their automatic process, they won't ever choose to walk out of this group if you set them to a behavior where they have to be inside a group. And it should go without saying that if you're assigning them to a group, make sure they're actually standing in the group at the time. I think it's a good question. They probably will walk, they might walk towards the group first and then stay within the group. It's worth testing that. I don't actually know if they'll do that or not. Obviously, if they don't, then you need to put them in the group before you assign them to that group. Okay. But that's what the group option is. So we can either say they can walk everywhere on the map, they can go nowhere on the map, or they can go to a defined area where we set, either a smaller set of the map or a certain section of it. Okay, and then you put the name in there that you named the group of all those tiles. Okay. And then we've got movement interval, and this is when they choose to move. If we've set them to either all or a group, if they choose to move, how often do they decide, oh, I'm going to move to another tile? We've got a couple of options. We've got random range or fixed. Fixed will give you a single option underneath, which is the length. So we could say every 5 seconds they choose to go to a different time. If we say random, then it's a range from the lowest to the highest. So this now means this NPC, every 5 to 10 seconds, they will randomize it. So one time it might be 5, then later, then the next time it might be 7. So it's just going to be a random amount of seconds that it's going to move to a different tile. So that will give you a sort of bit of variety with how often your NPCs are walking around. So the minimum is 5, but we could say the minimum is 1. So they might move immediately, and other times they might wait for a whole 10 seconds, right? So it gives them, and obviously you've got all the numbers in between as well, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They will just randomly choose between 1 and 10. And each time they decide to move, they'll decide that. Okay. Next, we have movement direction. We could say none, which basically means even though we've told him to walk around, he's not going to, because we said you can't go in any direction. So next we have random. So in order to explain the difference between these two options, let's set up a visual example. Okay. So let's use Stumpy here, and let's say I adjust the navigation by changing 3 of these lines to pending, okay, which means this AI can't walk down those 3 lines, okay? So only 1 out of these 4 paths is walkable, okay, because AI will basically use the lines to navigate. So going back to the behavior settings, so what random will do is it will randomly pick any tile around the NPC. So in other words, it's got 4 tiles that it can randomly choose from. Okay, and that will include these tiles, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay, those are the 4 tiles it's going to randomly pick between. Okay, now 3 out of those 4 the NPC won't be able to do anything with, because they can't go that way. There's pending lines. So what this will basically cause is a situation where you may have moments where because of the place where Stump is standing, there'll be moments where after the interval rates, let's say we had this at fixed 5 seconds, for example, okay, this doesn't necessarily mean the NPC is going to move every 5 seconds, because in this scenario, with this setting, if the randomizer picks this tile, and then the AI is going to go, well, I can't go that way. So then after 5 seconds, it's just going to remain standing there. And then after 5 seconds is up, the randomizer will then pick a different tile. Maybe it picks this one next time. And again, the AI is going to go, well, I can't go that way. There's a pending line there. So it waits there another 5 seconds. So you end up with, an NPC standing here for about 20 seconds or something like that before the randomizer eventually picks this tile. And then Stumpy goes, oh, I can go that way, and then moves. Okay. Whereas random forced eliminates all the ones that it can't use. So in this case, random force will always only pick this one. If you had more than one path open, let's say we opened up this path here, then now there's 2 out of 4 tiles that the randomizer could pick. So if we select that one, that one, that one, and that one, now with random forced, it's not going to ever choose randomly one of these two. It's only ever going to choose between paths that the AI could actually move. So that basically forces, and the reason why it's called random forced, is it forces that every 5 seconds your NPC can move somewhere. So, for example, if we had random instead of random forced, and the AI ever randomly moved to, let's say, here, if you've ever encountered situations where your NPCs reach the edge of a map and then they seem to stand there for a while before they go anywhere, that's because random is constantly picking this space, okay? Because it's picking directions. So that way, that way, that way, or that way. And if random is always, just gets itself in a loop of choosing this direction, then the NPC is just going to stand there for however long it takes before it eventually picks this direction or that direction or that direction. Whereas if you ensured that it was random forced, then this direction, because the AI has reached the edge of the map, will never be randomized. It will never be included in the random selection. So when the NPC reaches the edge of a map, it ensures that the NPC will always move on their next turn or their interval rate, either up, down, or backwards. Okay, they will never get stuck on something they can't navigate. So, for example, if they get to here, they won't keep trying to. The random selection won't keep including this direction in the list because it knows it can't go there. So why should it pick it? So moving on from that, we then have forward. So forward basically means that it's pretty self-explanatory. This NPC is always going to move forward. So every time he moves, he's always going to be going in this direction, okay, until he gets to the edge of the map, and then he'll stop because he can't go forward anymore. Now, there's something that you can do in that scenario, and we'll get to that in a second. That's the next option down, which we'll talk about in a second. But let's just move on to the next ones. Backward. Now, there's an important distinction to make here between backward and opposite because they do very different things. Backward means that the character is always going to move in the opposite direction to where they're facing, okay? And they're going to literally walk backwards, like they're, moonwalking, okay? So Stumpy is actually going to stay facing this direction, but he's actually going to walk backwards and keep walking backwards until he can't walk backwards anymore. So, for example, in this case, he would walk backwards twice, still facing this direction, until he gets to the edge of the map, and then he'll be stuck because he physically can't go backwards anymore. But again, the second option allows you to specify what should he do when he reaches somewhere he can't continue to walk, okay? Opposite, however, means that your character is going to walk back and forth between 2 tiles, because opposite literally means go in the opposite direction to the last direction you walked. So if he's currently facing this way and he walks, let's say, forwards, then his next move is going to walk the opposite, and then the opposite, and then the opposite, and then the opposite. So that's how you create basically like a patrol between 2 tiles. It's because opposite means he's always going in the opposite direction to where he went last. Okay. Go back to the game configuration. Go to the next option. Left. Now, left is different to the cardinal directions like south, west, east, etc. Let's talk about left. Left basically means he's always going to go to his left. Now, what that means is that the character is going to essentially walk in a square. Obviously, it would be a circle, but because it's all in right angle movements, it's essentially he's going to do a square, okay? Because in other words, he's going to go to his left, and then left, and then left, and then left, and then essentially keep going in a circle, a square, okay? And right will be the opposite direction. So he'll go counterclockwise in one direction and clockwise in another direction, right? Whereas the north, south, east, west means he's going to continue going north, continue going south, and continue going west, continue going east. So he's always going to be walking forwards in a particular direction, Okay. Next, we have the reaction to obstacle, which is what I sort of alluded to earlier. This is how does the NPC react when it reaches somewhere it can't go any further? Now, that option is only available to the third down to the last option. Okay, so none and random don't use this reaction to obstacle. That's because none, obviously, you're not going anywhere, and random will include obstacles in the consideration, whereas random forced is obviously always going to be picking available paths. So, but it could end up leading the character into an obstacle. So then what happens, when that occurs? And then obviously, if you're constantly going forwards, you could reach an obstacle. If you're constantly going backwards, you could reach an obstacle, and all of these things, So every other option has this as an extra option, which is what happens when that NPC reaches an obstacle. Nothing, in which case they'll just wait for the next, interval rate, and then, their movement direction might lead them somewhere else. Force them to turn left. So as soon as they hit the obstacle, they'll immediately turn left. Force them to turn right. So that's how they'll then react to an obstacle. As soon as they encounter a tile or an obstacle, turn right. Reverse direction. So they'll literally turn around and go back the opposite way. Stop permanently, which basically means they stop and that's where they stay. Even after the interval rate, they just stop. It's almost as if they don't have any movement. They're like turning this on. None. And then the last one is run a script. So if they encounter an obstacle, you could have a script pop up like a log message or a display message or spawn something or whatever you want to do. Basically, you just have a script that does something. As soon as they react to an obstacle, run script. That script is triggered. Okay. Player interest is the part of the behavior where we can set how interested is this NPC in the player character. And it has a couple of settings. None, obviously, is the default. Means they have zero interest in the player. They'll just walk around randomly or stand still randomly, whatever behavior settings you've set here, these will continue to play out regardless of what the player's doing. It's important to point that out, that if we set, for example, Stumpy to have a movement area of all and a movement interval of random 2 to 3 and a movement direction of always walking forward or just random or whatever, if we change this setting, these will override these. This behavior will kick in and take priority over the idle stuff. This is idle movement, but the player interest is what I call priority movement. It suddenly kicks in and takes priority while it's active. Now, what do I mean by while it's active? Well, you'll notice that these two options that we can set create another option underneath, which is the range in tiles of this particular interest setting. Okay? So, for example, if we changed it from none to seek out player, then what seek out player means is that this character with this behavior, if it's valid, and that's where this option comes in, and we'll talk about this in a minute. If it's valid, they will then always try and get as close as they can, and the minimum is a tile away from. They'll always try and get as close as they can and stick to the player character. Okay? For example, people who you want to follow you. The interest range in tiles, this setting here is how far away does an NPC, what range do they have to be within to keep this setting active? Okay, so at the moment the default is 6. So as long as this character is within 6 tiles of the player, this will be active and it will overwrite their idle AI. If the player was to walk out of 6 range to 7, 8, 9, 10, to however big your map is, if this character that's got this behavior is outside of 6, so 7 to whatever, then even though this is set on their behavior, they'll fall back to the idle and they'll just start randomly walking around again. Okay, but the moment you walk back into this range of 6 or less, this will kick in again and they'll start following you again. They'll start seeking you, okay? Avoid player is the opposite. Avoid player is they're going to try their best to get as far away from you as they can, and they'll do that until they exceed the range of the setting underneath. So in other words, if the player is still within 1 to 6 tiles, they're going to move to a tile further away in the opposite direction of the player. So think about it like magnets. This is attracting. This is the opposite to magnets. You know, the opposites attract. So these are pulling the player and the character together. This is then being set to the polar identical, so they're being repelled. So as you move towards them, they're going to try and move away from you, okay? And they're going to continue to do that until they reach 7 or more in this case, okay? If I'd set this to 2, then as soon as they reach 3 or more, then this will stop and they'll go back to being idle, okay? Randomly roaming around or whatever it is you've set, okay? If you then walk within 2, they'll again try and walk out of that range, okay? And they'll keep moving until they're out of that range. So if I move within 6 and then just stand still, they'll move as far away as they need to be out of this range, okay? So those are all of the behavior settings. Again, if you want to read up on them, they're documented in the documentation. Now let's talk about more advanced use of behaviors, which is scripting, okay? Because we've got these options here. Now, what are these? These are references you can use when writing scripts to change these individual options that we've gone over here. So rather than having to apply a completely different preset, if we just wanted to change one or two of these settings, we don't have to completely apply a separate preset. For example, let's say we apply this behavior to Sarah. So we want to, let's say, I'm just trying to think of the quickest, simplest way to demonstrate this. Let's say movement area, okay? So she starts immobile, let's say, okay? So if we click OK on that, and we apply that behavior to Sarah in her voxel editor as her behavior, when we place Sarah on the map, she's going to have that behavior, which means she's immobile, okay? Because she's got the Sarah preset, okay? Let's go into game quickly. So here we are in game, and we can see that Justin is roaming around because he's got a standard behavior. Sarah, however, is not roaming around. She is standing in place because she's got a behavior preset with her movement area set to none immobile. I think Stumpy must have the same setting. Okay, but Sarah's not going to go anywhere. Okay, now if we wanted to change that so that she now starts walking around, one way would be to give her a completely different behavior. And to do that in script, you would just simply, I'd need to give her an ID. Let me just quickly do that. Let's give her an entity ID so we can reference her in script. Sarah1. So Sarah's standing there. She's not doing anything. But one way we could make her walk around is we could go to, okay, we could type in entity. Now, obviously you would write this into a script, but I'm just going to put it in the console so we can see what it does live at runtime. So entity Sarah1, so reference the person standing on the map, dot behavior, and this then references their behavior setting. And then we can say equals, and then this is where you would put, for example, the name of the preset that you've made. So Sarah, for example. We could set this to standard, possibly. I think that's a name we can use. It's invalid. Okay, so you would actually have to create your own. You can't put them back to standard unless it's capital S. No. So if you want to sort of reset them to the default behavior, you would need to actually create one with that, okay? However, we don't need to actually change her entire behavior. We just, in this case, we just want to make her move, right? We don't actually need to completely, let's say, for example, she's got dialogue and we want to leave her with dialogue, Okay, we don't want to change the fact that she has dialogue or not. We still want to be able to talk to her, but we now just want to change the single setting of this behavior where she can now walk around. So if we alt tab quickly back to the editor, again, just to go over this, she's got this behavior. Let's say she's got dialogue. Let's give her a dialogue so you can actually see this in effect. Let me just quit the game, run it again. See how she's standing still and she's got a dialogue, okay? Because that's what we've set. We set it as move area none, but we've also said when we interact with her, start dialogue, okay? Now what I want to do is I want to make her move around, but I don't want her to not have dialogue. So I could set up a preset that's almost identical to the current one she's using that just changes the movement option. But that seems a bit like, you're creating more files than you need to actually create for a simple task like that. All we want to do is just change one option of the behavior that she's currently using so that she essentially is still using the same behavior, but just one of the settings is different. Okay. So to do that, that's what these options in the behavior documentation are all about. So we've got, let me just explain this table. We've got options on the left and options in the middle. The options on the left are the option in there's these options here, basically. It's referencing these options going down here. And then the ones in the middle are the options themselves that are in all the drop-down lists, okay? So if we want to, for example, change this option, because this is one Sarah's using at the moment, she's none in mobile, but we want to change it to, let's say, all, so she can start walking around, okay? Then we need to look up in here a keyword or keywords that sound like that option. Well, we've got one here called move area, and the options look very similar to the ones that are in the drop down. We've got all, we've got none, which is the one she's currently using, and we've got group, okay? Now we don't need group, but if you did want to use group, then you'd also use move area group afterwards and put in the name, okay? And we can also change things like the move interval, the move direction. Again, it's got all these options, none, random, random forced, forward, backward. All the options that we've gone over, you can see these are the scripting versions of those, okay? So go back to the game and I'll show you how it works. So to change a single option of a behavior, we first of all reference the entity again that we wish to change. So I want to reference the Sarah that's on the map. So this Sarah here by her ID. We then say we want to change her behavior options, but rather than saying equals, which will change the whole behavior, which we don't want to do, we're then going to open and close square brackets immediately after the word behavior. And within the square brackets, we open and close speech marks. And within the speech marks, you're going to type the option that you want to change. So I want to change the move area option. Okay. Then you type equals, and then you open and close speech marks again. And this is then when you type the option that it should be now set to. So if it's none currently, I want it to now be all. And that will change what her current behavior is, regardless of what the preset name is. Whatever behavior she's currently using, this setting is now going to become that. So as soon as I press enter, she should start walking around. We might have to wait 2 or 3 seconds, but there you go, because that's the interval movement range, right? If we increased, we could change that so she moves a lot quicker. So again, if we go Alt Tab, we can see that move interval, we could set it to fixed. So we could say move interval. We could say that's fixed. And if we put a semicolon, we can follow that up with a second one. Which was move interval value. Let's see if I can, if only you could copy and paste, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Move interval value. And then I believe this is a number, not a string. Yes, number. Or it could even be an array. It's array, obviously, if you're using range. But in this case, we're using fixed, so we'll put a numbering. So let's say she moves very fast, 0.1. So this is Sarah at the moment up here. You can see she's sort of moving randomly 2 to 3 seconds, okay? But as soon as I press enter now, she should start moving almost all the time. Yep. So that's how you change individual options. Now, obviously, if you're going to be changing a lot of things, you know, like giving her a def script, changing her dialogue, changing her movement speed, that's when you would create a preset, because it's much quicker to change all of these and then just say, use this name, use this preset, than it is to go and change that option and then that option and then that option in a script, right? So if you're changing multiple things at once, at that point, you're better off just saying, this character should use this behavior, right? But if you're just going to change 1 or 2 options at a time, you know, just this one instance, I want her to move in a group rather than all around, then obviously you can reference those in the script using this reference here. This table here will tell you what the option names are. So you put those within the square brackets, and these you put after an equals. Okay. So those go within square brackets. Those go after equals. Okay. And that's how you change individual behavior options. Okay. And I believe that leads us to the end of the video, because there's not a whole lot more there is to sort of explain about behaviors. We've gone over, you know, where they do and don't work. So they don't work in tactical turn-based battles. They only work in real-time maps. How you can set them on an NPC, so every NPC you place has that behavior. That also applies to NPCs or enemies or whatever that spawn in. So for example, if you're creating a spawn point, so in the combat tab, for example, you might have enemy spawns, spawn 1, and then you drag and drop an enemy. So let's say slime. Okay. This slime has obviously the model purple slime. So if we go into the purple slime model and assign a behavior, which is currently set to none, but if we were to go to the, if we were to use Sarah or create one specific for the slime, maybe, for example, one with the slime has an on-def script. That means now that every slime that spawns in via this combat spawner, because it's going to use that behavior because we set it on the model, that means every slime that spawns is going to have an on-def script. Okay, so that's how you give scripts to spawning entities. Okay, so hopefully that's covered everything you might need to know about behaviors. If you've got any questions, anything I've either covered but you still need some clarity on, or if I've missed something that you feel I should have covered, obviously do let me know in the Discord, and I'll be happy to go over anything that, you know, needs further explaining. But for now, that will wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next tutorial.